that. Here we go. I'm super excited to welcome Kriste Peoples to join us. Kriste and I first met each other a little over a year ago when we spoke on a panel together at Outdoor Retailer. We subsequently have worked together. She was a keynote for our We Are Changemakers speaker series that we do here in Reno. We spoke on a panel again at the last OR. And Kriste and I also interviewed her and included her in CSU magazine. And the reason why I wanted to have Kriste here today is that she is really exceptional at understanding affinity groups and communities of support and how to cultivate them. And the reason why I think that that is relevant to this group is that so much of the conversations that we've been having in weeks past have been about, like, as businesses or nonprofits or consultants, what is it that we do to give back to our community and to sort of develop community? And today there was even an article in Quartz where it specifically stated that businesses that are going to do well out after COVID-19 are the businesses that don't expect things from their customers, but actually do things for their customers. So today we're going to specifically talk about communities of support, what Kriste has done with them, how, like, her perspective on building them. And so that's kind of how the conversation is going to focus today. So Kriste, welcome to Inside Voices. Before we jump into the question, can you give everybody a little bit more background on who you are, what you do, what gets you up during the day, all those sorts of things?
Hi, everybody. Jen, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I've been looking forward to this conversation since the moment you asked me about it. A little bit about myself. I started Black Women's Alliance as, well, it was out of a personal need for myself, really, because I was living in Boulder, Colorado at the time, and I had been there for a couple of years. And whether or not you know it, like, Boulder was probably 97, 98% white at the time. And I just wasn't finding it easy to connect to any particular kind of social group or to really build deep relationships with people outside of functions that I had been invited to. I was going to different women's groups and different support groups for entrepreneurial types or creative types, and it was all quite friendly. And it's not that I didn't feel welcomed, but I also felt like there wasn't a need or series of needs that were being addressed in these particular groups. And so I started by asking or reaching out to a few different women that I knew. Hey, are you feeling this too? What do you think we could use? And so, of course, we'll talk about that as we go. But really, the way I started on my own journey of community building was by looking at a need, right? Like feeling out where I was missing something that I felt was essential, and then figuring out how to fill that void for myself, and also to address that, by connecting with other women. And so it has been quite an interesting journey up to this point. So what gets me out of bed? That depends on what day of the week it is. Sometimes it's about, really feeling mission driven. What can I do with my community today? What project am I working on? How can I really achieve my best selfness in the world? High idealized sort of pursuits or inspirations like that. And then other days, what motivates me is, I gotta pee. And if it weren't for that, I would stay in the bed, because this is hard and I don't really know what use I'm serving. I don't understand where I fit. I don't know why. And quite frankly, I can't, but and that's just the truth. And I would say in between those two extremes is, you know what? I don't know what's in store for the day, but I am willing to be open to it. I'm willing to be led. I'm willing to figure it out, or let life or circumstances kind of influence which way I'm going to go. Now, I will also say, in addition to that, I am a producer at a media company, and I work with a lot of wisdom teachers who are all about the path and the way that you can kind of deepen your connection to self and to others and all that sort of thing. And being able to work very closely with thought leaders. I also do a lot of work in the outdoor industry. And again, they're again working with lots of people who are thought leaders in that field. Seeing the other side of that work, seeing how hard it is, seeing how very insecure all of us are at times is a huge driver for me too, because part of what really inspires me is the act of demystifying this whole process. Some people think you need to show up on the scene fully formed with 10,000 likes in your back and a whole lot of money and self-acceptance and actualization and all that stuff, and a great guy or gal or whatever it is that, you know, is supposed to kind of demonstrate sort of having arrived, when that couldn't be farther from the case. Lots of leaders, thought leaders, wisdom teachers, uh, outdoor mouthpieces, policy analysts, all these people are for a large part doing this work because there's something deeply internal, you know, within themselves that is driving them forward in this work. So I will stop there, Jen, and just take your questions, or you tell me what.
Yeah, well, I'm going to ask you, I'll start with a question, and then, you know, for all of you on the call, feel free to pop any questions you have into the chat. But so you talked about how you started Black Women's Alliance, which it's a community of support for women of color to support them in wellness and growth. And you talked a little bit about, you know, you knew that you needed to start this group for yourself and also for your community, and bring people together around these shared identities and values. And you knew that that was needed, you know, years ago prior to the current circumstances. So I was just curious, like, how did you know, or how did you sort of find your group, find the people and the mission and the program that you wanted to be able to start? So you had this idea in your mind, and then how did you actually get there?
So initially, so it is a social group, a support group, right? And we're all about creating new narratives of wellness, whether that's inner wellness, whether that's, you know, wellness that you get by going outside, exercising together, hiking, running, whatever it is. And it is not not based on a financial model. Again, it's something that we're offering to each other. And so my big thought was to invite women in the community who were doing things who had like service-oriented businesses, side hustles, aspirations, to come to our group and lead workshops. I mean, it was as simple as that. I thought my initial thinking around wellness was to kind of amplify what I had seen happening in other groups that I had been attending in Boulder, right? So let's say it's something that was entrepreneurial in nature, where women were coming together to share resources and to talk about, you know, how do you do your next steps? What's your process? Let's share our intel, right? So for me, I thought another piece of that wasn't being addressed was, hey, how do you deal with microaggressions at work? how do you find support when management is telling you that you can't wear your hair naturally, like your, white cohort or your white colleagues are? Like, how do you handle it when you know that you are being passed over for a promotion because of unconscious bias that kind of sidelines you in your tracks in terms of like trying to get ahead in your company? So these were things that, while they might have been addressed a little bit, in dominant groups, there wasn't any way that I saw that they were really going to be centered outside of that group, unless there was a group that actually did that. Another piece, that was another piece of it. So that's how, those are facets of how I knew it was necessary and how I could identify people to come into the group. Oh, this woman over here has a placement agency. She's a woman of color. She understands these issues. Come talk to us. Another woman has a consulting company to talk about how to put your best foot forward. A lot of women on very tight budgets could use, were able to use her services. And this is all, again, in service to being able to capitalize on the collective talent that was in the community, kind of hidden in plain sight, because there weren't really many places for these women to go and have a sort of built-in audience for what they were offering. And so bit by bit, as there were more organizations and groups that popped up, either we collaborated and did joint events, or we said, hey, this group over here is doing this thing, let's go support them. So in recent years, it's been a lot about identifying other groups or other niche organizations, because I'm not the only one who understands the value of these affinity groups, or people who kind of mobilize or constellate around a series of like shared values, issues, or experiences. There are different ways to connect and to build. We don't have to do it all on our own.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like what I appreciate about what you're saying and how I think it applies to this group, if we've spent so much time over the past few weeks talking about like, you need to know like who are your customers, who's your community, why are they coming to you? And so there might already be a million different groups that have been started, but what I'm hearing from you is that it's so important to really get granular and understand what isn't happening, and feel and thinking about how you can help fill that void, and then look for those opportunities of partnership if there's something duplicative, or if there's this opportunity. And it doesn't mean that you stop doing what you're doing, because you're really clear about who you serve and why you're showing up for that. And it's really, and what you do is fundamentally different than the other more general like women's outdoors groups or entrepreneur groups, because you are focusing on the lived experiences of women of color, and that is unique. And I think all of us probably, like when we think about who, like our communities, there is something really unique there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Like what's your lens? What's your filter? Are you a mom who runs? Are you in the LGBTQ population, and there are issues that are not being addressed in the groups that you already love? It doesn't mean that you are abandoning any of your other identities, or that you are pushing other memberships aside. It's that you're also addressing another important need that is not being served in the places that you're already going. And I will say that it's really beneficial to those communities that you have been involved with, if you can find a way to sometimes bridge and connect with them as well. In my own outdoor experience, for example, there are organizations that I was able to connect to Black Women's Alliance in order to do some backpacking trips and some snowshoe trips. And I could work with the Department of the Parks and Rec Department to get gear and transportation to go out and go snowshoeing and that sort of thing. So there are ways to really leverage your current relationships so that they don't break the budget. You're not trying to reinvent the wheel, and you're still staying true to that mission or that need to meet the requirements or the goals that you've set for your own group.
Yeah, thank you. We have a question from Stefani here, who she's curious, what forums or formats do you use? In-person meetings, Facebook, etc. Which ones have worked best, and how did you decide the best forum or format to use?
So we use a little bit of the kitchen sink tactics here. We are on Meetup, we are on Facebook. We also have we had a few local spaces where we were meeting. One, we were holding our POC meditation groups at our gatherings at a meditation center sanctuary here in Denver. We were hosting some workshops at a community center at a neighboring facility in Denver. And now, just like what we're doing here, we're moving more to Zoom and Hangouts. And so it depends on what it is that you're trying to do. We do a bunch of different things, although I think going forward, the lion's share of it will be online. So we just continue to explore ways to be in community online.
One thing that I learned a long time ago, and this is when I was the director of Adventure Risk Challenge, which is how I know Susie, who does the back end for these calls. And ARC is a program that works with underrepresented youth to get them into the outdoors and help them build their leadership and literacy skills so that they can pursue college. Most of them are first generation. I worked a lot in the Central Valley of California. And one thing that I learned through that was that you have to go to your community. That's like such a big part of building community, that you can say like, well, I want to be on Facebook or I want to be on Zoom. But if the community whom you're trying to reach doesn't participate in that, you're going to struggle. So I would encourage people to think about like, and this is once again, you have to know your community, and you can do market research for this, right? But how is it that people want, like, how do they want to engage? And obviously there's restrictions now, like none of us get what we want anymore, which is okay, right? But, so there's that. The other thing I just want to say too is that I think it's helpful. I think the kitchen sink approach is strategic and helpful because because people do have all these different ways of engaging. So the more, also no one pays attention to anything. Let's just be honest. So if it's on Meetup and a Facebook group and you put it on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and you send out the email, that all you kind of need to do a lot of things and do them frequently to have, to get the participation that you probably want. Like you can't just create it. It's never a build it, they will come sort of thing. Ever.
Right.
Never.
Right. And and everybody has different interests, and everybody's schedules are in flux, if not blown up these days. And so people and things are shifting all the time in terms of, in terms of the season. In January, people might be totally into doing things together and getting out and meeting more folks and getting fit and healthy and well and all that sort of stuff. And then come mid-January, you might see more people turning up in your Zoom group because, things change, or that, that motivation has sort of waned and now the interest has shifted. And so that means the bulk of your participation might either be dwindling in one area and then growing in another, or plateauing. I think it's really important too, in addition to what you just shared, Jen, was to really look at what do I want to be offering, to constantly be asking that question, because particularly if it's something that is offering a service or experience to people, when you're not really asking for anything in return beyond community and having this shared experience of support together, you got to make sure it's still interesting for you and viable for you, because again, you don't know what sort of turnout you're going to get. You don't know what sort of feedback until you float it. So it's important to allow yourself to be agile, to be curious, and to be to not be attached to what it is you're offering, because if you pin your hopes on just one thing, then that not only takes away from the overall experience of it for you, but it probably isn't going to serve your group in the way that you initially thought either.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you, I didn't put this in the questions, but when you were talking, it made me think of it, is that, a lot of what we're talking about is like really honing in on a specific group of people. And one thing that you and I talked about when I interviewed you for Sisu was how some people don't like to be excluded. Right? So if you have an affinity group for women of color, there's always going to be someone who's like, well, why can't I be in this group? Why is it just for women of color? You see things that are generally for women, and there's always like one guy who's like, this is sexist. I want to be a part of this too. Like, you're always, no matter what group you try to focus on, there's always going to be people who are not pleased that you didn't necessarily welcome them in. So can you speak a little bit about like sticking to your values and your mission and knowing why it is you do what you do and continuing to do that, while also addressing those occasional moments of discomfort when people say, well, why wasn't I invited here?
Right. So we run a yoga class couple times a month. And so I was doing one of those sponsored ads, right? A boost in Facebook. Black Women's Alliance, yoga, body positive, women of color, welcome and all that stuff. And I got, wonderful feedback from it and all that. And then one woman comes through and says, oh, I'll do the white lady yoga. Thanks anyway. And so, and
you're like, that's called a microaggression, and that's why we started this group. So thanks for proving why it is what we do. But I can't say that on Facebook now. But anyways, that's what I'm saying.
But the thing is, like, that's a complicated, the question gives rise to a complicated series of answers, because one, there might be some internalized feeling of guilt there. Oh, well, why do we need to separate? Or what, how can I language this in a way that isn't off-putting to my friends who are not women of color? What should I even be doing this? And then I have to sit with myself. Well, in the past, these were some early considerations. I don't have these conflicts anymore because I'm very clear. But the thing is that there were a number of women who had shared that, in these yoga classes, I am not a stick thin body type. And I feel overly scrutinized when people want to come up to me and touch my hair or try and show me how to do the pose or put their hands on my body without asking permission. It's too much. I go to yoga as a means of safety. It's my sanctuary. I go there to replenish, and I can't do it in some of these classes, or I need a break, or how about I want to see other people who look like me there. So, after hearing that sort of feedback and experiencing it myself, I knew that it was important to language it in a way that says, um, we we appreciate your concern, and here is a way that you can support the work we do. Please watch for future events where where it's open to everyone. Right now, this is a space for us to come together and have the sacred time and celebrate, the body of the woman of color, because for too long we have felt, marginalized, alienated, and this is a way for us to really bear witness to, um, to our needs, and the importance of time together. So it's like, so it becomes, and so the more we were able to do that, the more people started to understand the importance of it. And I think by extension, I was a lot less self-conscious about it. I and there's no reason that I should have been overly self-conscious about it in the first place, and which speaks to the need to have that kind of experience for the women in the group, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And it really, I think, like, this conversation speaks to what all of us should, be, have done, continue to work on, evaluate, which is like, what are our values? So like, if you're a brand, business, consultant, like, what are the values of, like, what that stand behind your professional work? How do you choose to live those professionally? What is, like, obviously there's like the personal side of it, but I think the more that you get really clear on what those values are and you start to articulate them, it becomes easier to manage any of the criticism, because you get crystal clear of why you do what you do. And whereas, I know some people in this group may not have so much controversy around their affinity groups, other people might, and you just never know. You never know who's going to like what you're doing or not, but it's this, like, thinking about who's your community, why you show up for them, how you show up for them, what your values are. Like, this extends beyond even like an in-person event or a Zoom call. This is like the language that you use in your marketing, in your in your social. So this all ties in to, like, all these things that we've been talking about, of like, know your values and know how to live them as a brand or a business or a consultant, because that's what's going to guide you to figure all this out, right?
Yeah. And then, when you can really understand what that means and really embody it, there isn't any need to kind of hedge or hide behind anything, or feel like you're making some sort of special accommodation, or you're sneaking it in, behind like the mainstream group or whatever. And it also having this sort of clarity opens you to collaborating in new ways with other organizations that are also probably looking for inroads into what it is that your community is about. So we see in the outdoor industry, we see unlikely hikers, which is a group of a constellation of different different abilities, so-called able-bodied and otherwise, enjoying nature, different body types, from the stick thin to the really rotund. Everybody is out celebrating themselves, fully aware of their own right to take up space. And that's another thing that I have seen as common among a whole lot of women, is this fear of taking up space and apologizing when doing so. So, and that's its own sort of navigation that we have to work our way through, right? Is showing up with the understanding that we belong wherever we are, because we say so. And we have something to offer just because we're offering it. without doing some kind of big rigmarole or contorting ourselves to fit into some kind of big idea that has maybe been put on us that we don't really fit, or that doesn't really resonate or serve our needs or our interests. So I think a huge part of community building is not only getting clear about the values of your group or your, whatever your statement is, but also looking at, okay, where is this coming from? What needs am I really trying to speak to here, and why does it matter? Those are all big questions to sit with and revisit. More importantly, continue revisiting.
Yeah. Why does it matter? And that could be, I think that in this current time in history, the why does it matter could be shifting over time. So like what we do this month in May could be a little bit different from June, July, August, as we continue to live through this pandemic. The values and that overarching like will always stay the same, but there might be like, well, this month we need to focus on mental health, or like this month it's, like there's all these different pieces, and it's a lot of it just comes down to like really knowing your community and figuring out how to show up for them.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we got a couple more questions. So this one's from Raquel. What are your favorite strategies for developing partnerships and collaborations with other groups?
Building on relationships. I'm a big relationships person, Raquel. So let's say you are the community partnerships manager at some local outfitter, right? You provide trips or gear or trainings or something for people to go outside. Because we have cultivated a relationship, we just like each other as people. I'm going to start talking to you when an idea comes up for a project or a program, to see how we might align, how what you're offering can meet the needs of what my group is bringing. And then from there, we'll start to talk about what's feasible, what our timelines are, what our end goals are, and whether or not we can work together, to create some sort of series or offering for the community that benefits everyone. So that is my favorite way of building programming by way of relationships, because it's a logical next step for me. And so I'll give you an example. There's an organization here called Women's Wilderness. And what they do is a lot of outdoor programming for girls. Some programming also extends to women, but lots of rock climbing, extended backpacking trips and everything. And I was friendly with a few women there because I'd volunteered over the course of a few years and gotten to know a bunch of people. And so I said, hey, I think my women's group would really be interested in doing an adult programming, doing some adult programming with you. What can we work on? And so over the course of a few days, we figured that we would offer an intro to backpacking course to the women. So fast forward, we have half a dozen women out on this backpacking trip. And one of the women, who might have been in her 60s, said, I really needed this because I had been afraid to sleep outside. And I knew that I needed to conquer my fear. And this was a safe place for me to do that, because I want to be a badass Nana for my grandson, and I can't be a badass Nana if I don't have this experience for myself. And so that was a huge gift for all of us, for the people at Women's Wilderness, for our guides, for me, and for everybody else who was within earshot of this woman who was sharing this deeply personal experience, all because we were able to leverage our relationships and look at ways that we could do something that was beneficial for all of us. So that is far and away my favorite, most authentically engaging sort of path to programming.
Yeah. And once again, it like really speaks to like, what is it that people need versus what is it that I want to create? There's that nuance, right? Like obviously
Yes.
all of us as like business owners, consultants, or, whatever it is that we do, we all have the things that we want to create, but understanding what people need is such a big part of it. We have a question from Julie. She says, "Hi, Kriste. Do you have a favorite event that you've been a part of with the Black Women's Alliance? Is there one event that comes to mind that made you feel most connected with the members of the community? And why do you think that event was so successful?"
So we did, thank you for that question, by the way. Uh, yeah, so we had a retreat a few months ago. It might have been, it's about a year ago, actually. And we brought together a bunch of different teachers in the space or in the group who had different disciplines. One was a writer, another was a yoga teacher. We had a creative arts person and a few others. And we spent a day in a retreat where everyone was offering their gifts to all the women that had come to the gathering. We kept ourselves, and rather than doing breakouts, we kept ourselves together in this day-long sisterhood retreat so that we could all benefit from being in the same space, learning from the same instructors at the same time. And each of the instructors were in turn learning from each other. So it was this wonderful exchange of training and talent and community and discussion. And by the end of it all, it felt like we had not only answered the call to play together, but we had also built some new relationships. We were able to kind of be in a space together where we could drop our guard and participate in a full-on, full-hearted way. So that was probably my favorite experience, because it also introduced the women to trainers and educators that they hadn't had exposure to previously. And it was really easy to do because women tend to collaborate well with each other. And so that helped us create something that was really dynamic and responsive to the needs of the group.
How many people were at that day-long event?
We held it at the meditation center. So we were capped at about 60 people. So okay. It was, yeah. And I will say that we might have had different ideas on what a retreat was. So so we brought a little bit of volume and energy to the space that day. Yeah.
Awesome. I have a question for you. So you talked a lot about all the things that you have done. I'm curious if you can speak to any pitfalls to avoid. So either like experiences that you've had that you've learned from, or things that you've seen from other groups, or just generally like in this process of community building, getting to know your community, thinking about creating value and services for your community, what would be some pitfalls to avoid so that we can just do this work in the best way possible?
There are several. Don't try to be anyone but yourself or yourselves, right? So even if so when I started, there weren't many other groups that were addressing women of color's needs. And so I was like when I mentioned that, I was like putting my feelers out for different trainers and instructors. Like those are women who were in the business space, women who were in the like healing arts, wellness, nutrition, whatever, in that space. And I realized, like, wait a minute, I see this organization over here who seems to be doing something that's overlapping with something that I'm offering. I am not a business incubator space. Hey, business teachers, do you know about this business group for that's serving women of color? Here's a potentially great collaboration opportunity for you. It's not something that BWA is necessarily needs to take on, since they're doing it so well. So look around and see, again, like we were saying earlier, keep checking in, asking those questions, keep looking around, seeing who's doing what. Is there another organization that has popped up that's doing something that you were kind of doing? Maybe get with them and talk about how you might either collaborate or how you might just let go of doing that particular thing in your group. Again, this is about being agile and responsive to what you're really trying to do. So rather than trying to spread yourself too thin by doing everything, really continue to like look at what makes the most sense. Otherwise, you're reinventing a wheel that's already rolling over here somewhere else, and they're rolling better, quite possibly. Another thing that I would say from the benefit of hindsight is to really stay focused more on the mission or your goal or how you want to serve, what you want to offer, as opposed to how many people like it or love it or share it, because when we start chasing after numbers or likes or whatever, when we're doing that, that means we're not doing something else. And so that something else is really giving attention and care to what it is you want to be building, right? And this is so much easier said than done, but not playing the comparison game. That's a huge pitfall. That's just, you may as well just like, I don't know, throw yourself down in a ditch, because that's about as good as, that's about as useful as the comparison game is, right? Because we don't know what other people are going through. Mm-hmm. And to try and compare ourselves to somebody else's, presence, especially online, it's just a losing game. Keep checking in with yourself to make sure you're doing what you need to be doing. Check in with your community. Check in with other organizations or groups that are doing similar things, and make sure that you're offering that you're about what you say you're about, and that you're actively collaborating and reaching out with people that are going to help you further your mission and be of real service to the people who need and want what you have to give.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot, that the idea of like chasing and comparing, it's like, yeah, the fat, like can be so depressing. And I've just been thinking about like, I'm no longer going to use Instagram as a metric for any sort of success. So whereas I will go to Instagram to like learn, find interesting people, maybe get ideas, I want to really shift like my personal thinking around it from not chasing, not following, not comparing, and not making Instagram be something that it's not, or that it maybe shouldn't be. And I think that when we talk about building these communities, I think that could be a pitfall, is like looking at like, oh, well, I only have 100 people follow me on Instagram, so now I can't do it. Well, but maybe what you can do is offer something exceptional in person that just doesn't translate well to Instagram, and that's okay. So like, how are the other ways that you communicate with people and not feel like you have to have this like on point, perfectly polished, Instagram, when there's so many other things that actually go into community building, community. And I think we've forgotten that, because or maybe, I mean, I hope I'm not the only one who feels like shit when you open up Instagram and wants to open it less and wants to like do real work. So like, that's why I'm bringing that up, you know?
Right,
Yeah.
right. And that's a huge discipline in itself. It's like, you know, putting yourself on a social media diet, even though you need social media for what you need it for. But
Mhm.
when you go in, like I go in, I'll post something and then I get out. And then somebody will ask me, oh, did you see so-and-so was doing whatever, or over there, they're doing this. I'm like, nope, I didn't see it. The people that I'm in touch with, I'm already in touch with. And if it's something big that I need to know, then I'm sure I already know it, you know, or somebody's going to let me know outside of social media. Because think about like all those polished pictures. Have you ever caught yourself in the process of setting up like the perfect picture so it's just right? So it's just right. And you're like out of the moment by the time you finally click the pic, because you're like, wait, it's gotta be just so. And you know, I can say that for like trying to set this camera up right now, because I don't want you to see all this shit on my couch. But, but you know, it's so important to be real with this stuff. And I'm speaking to the choir in you, Jen, because you know, like being real, that is the most important, that is a critical pillar to anything that we do, whether it's, you know, a dozen likes or 1,200 or 12, how many ever, you know, people you have. And likes doesn't necessarily mean follow through to your event, you know. And also when people sign up for your events, a lot of times it might be that they show up the day of and sign up, or they show up from somewhere else, and so they're not signing up on your particular invite. So don't be discouraged if it seems like nobody is interested, because the way the algorithms work are just, you know, they're beyond me. It's so important to really stay clear and stay close to what your mission is. And as I say, staying clear, you know, it can change on you, because look what COVID did. So if I can say a little bit about the COVID situation,
Yeah.
in this experience, uh, before this, I was spending a whole lot of time, we were all spending a lot of time doing other things, right? Well, one of my ideas was to start up an interview series with wisdom teachers whose work I thought was really important and needed to be heard by, you know, wider audience. So I got on the phone, well, I got on the email one day and reached out to a bunch of different teachers. And I said, hey, would you, you know, I'm from Black Women's Alliance. We're all about wellness and creating new narratives. I really appreciate your work. And I want to be in conversation with you about, you know, how you're doing in the pandemic, what you might have to say to us about being in this pandemic. How can we learn from you some new tools and techniques for just being? And so, interestingly enough, most of the women who got back to me, well, everybody who got back to me said yes. Only two didn't get back to me because whatever, they're missing out. but everybody who got back to me within a matter of hours and said, yes, I would love to. Thank you so much for doing this. So all that to say, be receptive to whatever new ideas you have that are coming up in this time of COVID. It's requiring different behavior from all of us, not only in our day-to-day and how and whether we get out of bed, but also for your initiatives, your community service offerings as well. For me, you know, it started as just kind of an idea I had been kicking around as of, you know, early April. Now, maybe I've got half dozen conversations that I've posted, and it's been, and I've had a fair amount of very positive feedback. So I would say don't discount the ideas that have been kind of rolling around for a little while. Look for ways to move them forward, even when it seems like, I don't know to what end I'm doing this, but I really feel a draw to this particular thing. And the reason I say keep going or just start on it is because most of the time we can't know the next step until we've taken the first one.
Yeah. Yeah. And we had a call with Amanda Smith a few weeks ago. And one of the things she said was like, don't be precious. Don't be perfect.
Right.
Like get it out. Just like do something and it'll come. We have a question here from Katie that I want to make sure we get to. Katie's asking, when it comes to events, do you try to find people and organizations who will donate space and time, or do you charge your attendees? How do you navigate that balance?
Yes. so, so yes, sometimes we have worked out agreements where we have space at a very reasonable price, if not donated. And we do charge something minimal, at least, for people to, as a way to have an exchange. Because interestingly enough, if it's free, people don't always find value in that. And there needs to be some kind of an exchange, right? For people to be able to have a sort of buy-in. I know for myself, if there's something I'm really interested in, if I think if I see that it's free, I might be less inclined to go than if I lay down, 10, 15, 20 bucks
Mm-hmm.
for the same event, because not only have I committed my money, I have also ensured that I am entirely likely, barring a pandemic, I'm going to show up, And the other thing about that is that it's important to complete the circuit of giving and receiving, right? You're like giving all the time. Where are you then receiving, right? So not even in a money sort of way, but money is the marker that we're using here for these events. But you want to make sure that you're allowing people to give to you, because sometimes, and I think this borders on like martyr behavior. Oh, I'm giving so much to this mission, and oh, it's going to kill me, and all this other stuff, when in fact what we're doing is not really aligned to the mission at all. Because being in service also means that there's an exchange here, because people are you're getting something, they're getting something, and giving you something in return. So don't short circuit the process by not charging. Even if the space is donated, take a donation so that you can give back to the organization that has donated to you. And I'll just add one more thing. Like sometimes people with heart-centered missions are kind of fall under the spell of, oh, it's not right to receive. I'm just here to give because I come from the clouds and the unicorns. That's just not the world that we live in.
Yeah. Well, and Claire just made this comment that I was going to say the same thing. So Claire just said, another idea is to have a donation base where the proceeds go to a nonprofit if the speakers base are pro bono. And I was going to say the same thing, that like,
Exactly.
you talked about partnerships, and you could partner up with a nonprofit. Nonprofits normally get spaces for free. You oftentimes can navigate some alcohol, liquor license things with that. You don't get charged sales tax. There's like all these little things. So if it's, if you're not feeling like, well, I need to charge and receive money for it, a partnership with a nonprofit can absolutely help you ensure that you're creating value. There's a reason for people to show up, and then you could donate it to an organization that is in line with your values. And then there's that contributing back to your community and the service in a way that still allows you to, have this, use a currency that we've all agreed to use as, so,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Right.
Well,
But there's, yeah.
So it's 3:59.
Oh.
Yeah, we've made it. I know.
Whoops.
Here we are at the end of Inside Voices for this week. Kriste, before we sign off, I just want to give you a chance to say any final words, parting thoughts for us before we close this out today.
Do it. Start with, just follow the threads of your interests and your mission. Like, you don't have to see the full path by stepping onto the path. Just take that first step and let yourself be led to the next. And like, the more you work at it, the more you'll find out what to do next, the more you'll be introduced or led to different people. It's not some kind of like airy fairy hokey pokey thing. It's a real actual process and method that a lot of people use, and be willing to redefine your own metric of success. And again, chase whatever it is that's in you, or allow it to unfold, rather than chasing what's outside and completely not even related to what you're doing.
Well, Kriste, thank you so much for being here, for taking the time out of your day to share this. All of you who are on the call, thank you so much for being here as well. As always, you'll get the recording of this. I'll send out an email. Looking forward to seeing a lot of you next week. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. So great to be with you.
Thank you, Kriste.
All right.
Okay, bye.
All right, bye.